This is Live Fire, with the latest news about threats to your liberties and your right to keep and bear arms. Our guests include elected and other public officials, journalists, citizen activists, and others who are fighting for the Bill of Rights, especially the Second Amendment. Live Fire covers a broad range of constitutional issues, particularly the debate over private ownership of firearms. Our host is Larry Pratt, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. Remember, the issue is not just about gun control. It's about control. Now, here's your host, Larry Pratt.
Greetings and welcome again to another edition of Live Fire on the Gun Owners News Hour. Very interesting guest for you today. Ed Peruta is a man I've just gotten acquainted with over the phone, but he has been on the front lines of the fight for the right to keep and bear arms. He's spent a career as an investigator, a lot of work with a Second Amendment attorney who's done a lot of self-defense gun cases. Ed Peruta is able to divide his time between Connecticut and California and will be able to fill us in a little bit on how the battle goes in both of those states. And it's interesting that Connecticut, of all places, Ed, has moved into the front line of patriots defending the Second Amendment in a most unexpected way. I must say, I did not see this one coming, but tens of thousands, I think, would be a safe guesstimate of folks in Connecticut who have apparently purchased a semi-automatic rifle that the authorities know is an assault weapon and doesn't belong in our hands, at least unless it's registered, which is the new law in Connecticut, and can't have a magazine if it's over 10 rounds capacity. Awful lot of those magazines are out there, I'm sure. And so many people in the state of Connecticut just didn't pay attention. What's happened in Connecticut?
You mean in the Constitution state?
I see you have a very good sense of humor.
Larry, first of all, I need to run something by very quickly, but I'm going to get into Connecticut and California and, so much to say and so little time to say it.
Exactly.
But, Larry, I'd like to thank you and Gun Owners of America for the opportunity to participate in today's program. That's number one. Hopefully, my being your guest on the show will contribute something of a positive aspect to the program. I am a legal investigator for attorney Rachel M. Baird, B-A-I-R-D, and she has a website, and we're getting a new website, and you're going to be able to get a lot of information there. Good. I'm a director of Connecticut Carry, a nonprofit 501c4 organization involved in education and defending people's rights. Yes, I am the lead named plaintiff in Peruta v. San Diego that's kind of gone viral on the Internet. But I would like to acknowledge, and there's a reason for this, I'd like to acknowledge Connecticut attorney Rachel Baird because she's been a constant source of legal advice and information to me since I linked up with her in 2007. I'd like to thank San Diego attorney Paul Newhart, who agreed to represent and assist me in filing the federal case in San Diego. I'd like to thank attorney Chuck Michel and his firm, who, along with the NRA, offered excellent legal representation and substantial financial support. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Gun Owners of America, together with Gun Owners of California, and the various national and state Second Amendment organizations who have supported Second Amendment issues. I'd especially like to thank all the firearm owners who have offered their financial support to the national and state organizations and encourage everyone to join one or more of the groups that are dedicated to preserving, protecting, and promoting the right to keep and bear arms for self-defense. The only reason I'm sitting as a guest here today is the collective financial contributions made by those who have supported Second Amendment rights.
So that's a good overview. Thank you.
If you're listening to this program, please consider contributing your name and a donation to Gun Owners of America for the purpose of Second Amendment organizations. And I could go on, because I'm going to get into, if you'll let me, how the Second Amendment is not just the Second Amendment when it's affecting you. We deal with the First Amendment, you can get in trouble with a gun. Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, and obviously the 14th Amendment. And so, you could almost call it the 1245 Club. First, Second, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in Connecticut, and this is the way I describe it to people, evil arrived in Connecticut on December 14th, 2012. As usual, it was unexpected, unprepared for, and it devastated the state emotionally.
And it found a hole in the ability of citizens to defend themselves by going right smack like a moth to light to a gun-free zone.
Yeah, in other words, instead of a no hunting sign, there was a no firearm sign, come here and do it.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. But what has really, really gone to my core is the fact that the politicians, not all of them, but the politicians in Connecticut saw this as a tragic but opportune, a tragic tsunami wave. And rather than assisting people in getting out of the way or helping people, they grabbed their political surfboards and said to each other, surf is up, time to get what we want. And that's the way they reacted to it. And that, more than anything, is what has really fired me off. And Larry, I was a die-in-the-woods Democrat, and if you look at the early press releases and news stories from San Diego, I told everybody, I'm a die-in-the-woods Democrat. I just believe in constitutional rights.
That made you a very unusual Democrat.
6 months ago, I walked into my local registrar of voters and said, take me out of that one and put me over in that one. I'm done with them. And it was Governor Malloy. To some degree, there were people at the national level, but I'm really more affected by what's going on at the local level.
Sure.
But I am absolutely offended. As an investigator for Attorney Baird, a constant stream of people come into the office for the initial consultation, and then we vet the client, we look at their records, we listen to their story, we go out and we gather public records regarding the incident. We're beginning to see patterns. We're beginning to see new police techniques or new police attitudes evolving here in Connecticut. Rachel tries her best as a sole practitioner with one associate to address those issues. If we were a big law firm, boy, we'd be slamming somebody real hard. But here's a list, and you're going to give me some time, Larry. I mean, I'm going to give you time to talk.
Hey, if you give us this changing landscape you're talking about, go for it, pal.
Here's what we say in the office now, because we take an officer's deposition under oath. At a hearing, we put officers from the police departments up on the stand, and Rachel interrogates them, literally interrogates them fact-wise under oath. And here's what we've come out with. When questioned under oath, police officers often state, quote, I don't recall, unquote, which is the law enforcement equivalent of a private citizen saying, I refuse to answer on the grounds that I may tend to incriminate myself. Mm-hmm. The law enforcement Fifth Amendment is, I don't recall.
Now, let me ask you a question right there. If the officer can't recall, doesn't that elevate the weight of the opposing opinion?
Well, we are currently involved in the case, and because of attorney-client privilege, I'm not going to be able to give you the names.
That's fine. That's fine.
But what happened was some firearms got seized. Police went into the house. They took the firearms out of the house. And in Connecticut, you have a right to a 14-day hearing like ready.
Why don't we hang on to that point? We'll come back as soon as we're ready and pick up from there and talk about the really disturbing report that you've made about the police attitudes. We'll be back, folks. Stay with us.
Stay tuned for more Live Fire, the program that bears the raw truth about the battle over who controls the guns, the people or the government. Now, more news about the threats to your liberties and your right to keep and bear arms. This is Live Fire. And here once again is your host, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt.
Today I'm talking with Ed Peruta. He is someone who has investigated many self-defense cases in conjunction with Rachel Baird, a Second Amendment attorney who does a lot of self-defense gun cases. And we were talking about how in some particular case in Connecticut, a guy had his guns cleaned out of his house, and if it's the same case that I'm thinking of, they didn't bother to show him a warrant.
They don't need one anymore.
Yeah, apparently, yeah.
Nope. There is a case in Connecticut. It's the Nesbitt case, and the appellate. But let me back up for a minute. So a supervising police officer is on the witness stand in what's called the 14-day hearing after a seizure. 15 days ago is when it happened, and during a questioning by Attorney Baird, an officer says, I don't recall, in excess of 30 times.
That might create some bit of puzzlement in a juror's mind?
The case is not over. The court did, in fact, award the gentleman back his firearms. We are very aware of a case that I believe you were involved in, the Walter Reddy case.
Yep.
That case in this office is a foundation for a lot of things that Attorney Baird does and how she does it. I know it was Norwalk. I know it was Judge Hudak. Judge Hudak, if you go to, and I hate to say this, liarcop.com, you'll read the story of Dwayne Dutel. And Dwayne Dutel was in front of Judge Hudak. And we were aware of the Reddy case when we were down there with Dwayne Dutel. But let me go through a list. We have open or concealed carry in the state. Our applications for a pistol permit, the one wild card is what's called suitability. We have a case regarding what we call an illegal $50 fee for a state background check. In the state of Connecticut, our administrative hearings for denials and revocations have excess delays. They're projecting, like the permits in California, you can't get a hearing on a denial or revocation for 22 months. We in Connecticut have, and from Walter Reddy, you'll understand this, your listeners may not, but it's called the risk warrant statute. Report your neighbor if you think he needs to have his guns taken away. And the risk warrants and the right to search and seize prior to obtaining a warrant. In other words, the state appellate court said, well, they needed to take them, and they can apply for the warrant afterwards.
Oh, isn't that a Fourth Amendment, Jim?
Well, if we had the proper resources, I think that would be challenged. But we don't. And the client did not.
And they count on that, don't they? They count on...
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The resources of the state they'll go to no ends. But what I'm trying to say is we have a case right now, and it's kind of at the flash point where there could be a trial. And we have interns coming in, going through the police report, the statement of the person, the testimony of 4 officers under oath on the stand, looking for all of the different discrepancies, how the story evolved and changed over time.
And tell me, let me guess, the officers forgot everything. I don't recall.
Well, no, sometimes they did recall, but what they recalled the second time didn't match the first time.
Oops.
And when they recalled it the third time, it didn't match the second time, which didn't match the first time.
Oops.
And when you go into someone's home to search or to seize, you need to put your facts down in writing in an affidavit to apply for the warrant, so that when you go in, you seize, and you take out, the facts in the affidavit supporting the warrant don't change, unless you got a lot of whiteout.
Right.
But, that needs to be addressed here in Connecticut, and you're right. And I will tell you this, I saw an email 6 months prior to the incident in Newtown, where a very prominent person involved in firearms in this country was communicating with Rachel, and I'll just tell you what it said in June of 2012. Connecticut will be ground zero of firearm issues. Little did that person know that one comment stuck out in my head, and when all of this started going down in the spring of 2013, I went into my email, I pulled it out, and I presented it to Rachel. I said, do you remember this?
Spot on.
You know, and I do deal with the NRA, obviously because of my California case. I'm very aware of Gun Owners of America, and when I get off the phone, I'm going to send in my membership. But I'm a Vietnam vet, and I belong to the DAV, the American Legion, the VFW. You know, spread it around if you've got it.
Excellent.
I will tell you this whole, and you and I were talking the other day about the news reports or the reports out there that 200 or something police officers in Connecticut have said that they won't comply with the registration requirements.
I hope that's true, although apparently one guy that claims to have got that statement out in the public now admits that he made it up.
Well, I can assure you of this. I do speak to police officers who own firearms, who are pro-Second Amendment, and there is written into the new law in Connecticut an exemption that allows law enforcement officers to purchase prohibited firearms.
As long as they're cops.
As long as they're sworn and wearing a badge. If they decide to go to another career or they decide to retire, it's my understanding that they have to register their firearms within 90 days of taking the badge off.
So what that says is we can only trust you while you have a piece of copper on your chest. Well, and it's that copper that makes you trustworthy.
Rachel, the Connecticut Law Tribune had called Rachel Baird and asked her to do, they picked, I think, 14 lawyers in Connecticut to each do a prediction for 2014 on a different topic. And they called Rachel and they asked her to talk about firearms. And it's up on the web. You can find it either, go to Rachel's website, I really need to thank Connecticut Carry, who I'm a director. Rich Burgess puts together a website at ctcarry.com that you can really bop in there and get some really good information. And you can obviously understand where some of that information comes from that he does his generic press releases on. So we were talking, and Rachel said in an article, and she said to other people, why is it that a police officer needs an assault weapon in his home more than his neighbor? When the police officer leaves the house, does he not leave the AR by the front door for his wife to use if she's in trouble? Why do they get to have them and we don't?
And the answer was?
Well, that was a question she raised.
Uh-huh.
I have data mined the Department of Public Safety, and I sent you some of it, and I can get you more, Larry. For example, they gave me a list of 1,054,000 firearms, make, model, and serial number, and told me what towns in Connecticut they were in. They didn't give me names and addresses. But Rich Burgess was able to put together a list.
Doesn't that beg the question why they needed a second registry under the new law?
Well, according to the new law, if you had purchased it, say in Florida, simply as a long gun, and brought it to Connecticut prior to this legislation, that was legal. But now, if you possess it in the state of Connecticut, they want to know about it.
That hurts my head. All right, we're going to be back with Ed Peruta, more on Connecticut.
About the battle over who controls the guns, the people or the government. Now, more news about the threats to your liberties and your right to keep and bear arms. This is Live Fire. And here once again is your host, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt.
Fascinating discussion with Ed Peruta, an investigator working a lot with attorney Rachel Baird. who does an awful lot of Second Amendment self-defense cases. And we were talking about, as we headed into the break, the really totally arbitrary and almost funny, if it weren't so serious, way that the law has been made to say, well, the gun, if it comes to your possession this way, is okay, but if it came into your possession some other way, both legal, well, then you're illegal if you don't comply with our new law here in Connecticut. Oh, boy. Seems like they're setting themselves up for a number of challenges.
I've been asked on a number of occasions to explain what I do and how we do it. And this is the way I explain it. I believe, as an NRA instructor, and I authored my own course of instruction that was approved by the state police, because I go beyond safety. I actually get into what you should and shouldn't do. But I sit back and I say, a person who acquires a firearm, possesses a firearm, carries a firearm, needs to know the law, not just safety.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come to the police officers. When they get sued for screwing up, they always claim qualified immunity because they didn't know. Well, what you're admitting is you weren't trained. And police officers don't know the law. And then when you get arrested, you go into the court, and we see it on a regular basis. The prosecutor doesn't understand the law. And I've sat in back of Rachel or at the side of her when she's in court as her investigator, when the prosecutor yields to her and says, well, Your Honor, I think that she can answer the question better than I can. No, it's happened on a number of occasions.
But we're going to prosecute you anyway because we frankly just don't like you peasants having guns.
Right. Now, the prosecutor doesn't understand the law. Now, here is probably the most offensive thing that the gun owners of America are going to hear in this show. When people are in civil or criminal trials, the lawyers go into the judge's chambers and they discuss the case. And there are judges who have made comments in chambers off the record. Well, anybody that owns firearms ought to be ashamed of themselves.
Does that include the cops that are protecting him?
Yeah, well, let me tell you something. If you Google it properly, you'll find out that Rachel was ready to file a motion to force the judge to recuse himself. He also made a statement from the bench about me, and then he made a statement from the bench about Rachel because I gave the motion to recuse to a local TV station, and he held it up and said, Miss Baird, you're supposed to file it with the clerk before you file it with Channel 30.
Oh, poor baby.
But then he went like this. He said, well, and I'm going to speak very slowly to you because I went to Harvard and you went to Yale. Well, then the Yale Law School picks up on it. But the client was sitting there, and you got to tell him what's going on, and he says, I don't want to be in front of this judge. He's so anti-gun. We have another client with a case going now where he's stood next to Rachel through the entire process. There's a civil side and there's a criminal side to this issue. And the man is dedicated, church-going, but, you know, he's been married for a long time, and now they're getting divorced. But that's okay. But when Attorney Baird is in chambers with the prosecutor, in the presence of the prosecutor, the judge says, I'm not giving this guy's guns back. He looks scary. I mean, he's never opened his mouth, Larry.
Wow.
And now there's some hearings that are going to be coming in Connecticut.
Now, surely that's a recusable statement. That is just over the top.
But here's what happened. And there's been comments that Rachel was correct in what she did. I mean, she doesn't do it all the time. But can you imagine being a defense attorney or an investigator representing a client in a thing where you kind of know the facts and you hear these statements either coming from the bench or coming out of chambers where it's not on the record, and you sit there and say, we aren't getting any justice in this courthouse.
You bet.
And that is the fuse to Lexington. When you no longer know that you can get justice from the courts. When you feel that every administrative or judicial remedy to your issue is not going to work, people do things out of frustration. I'm not a sovereign. I do not believe in violence. But I am the first person who will lay down my life for the Constitution of the United States. I spent my 19th birthday on a landing barge between Fubai and Da Nang and never thought I would see 20. I look in the mirror, Larry, and I go, where'd that old guy come from? Because the 19-year-old kid's still in my head.
That this description of the way some of these jurors or jurists think and prosecutors, that is so prejudicial that I would hope that Rachel's going to find some way of maybe that's an appealable offense.
Well, you have to understand, there's somebody down, I think it's in either Texas or Tennessee, that just got released after doing 30 years on death row. He didn't do it.
Finally, DNA was available.
Well, but there are people who have to look at their family finances, have to look at the publicity that's going to come from it, and simply accept the deal.
Yep.
Oh, I'll go to the family violence program, or oh, I'll go to this, or oh, I'll do that. You know, and I sit back and in our law firm, and I'm sure every law firm in the country, you have to represent the client, not the issue.
Right.
Unless somebody comes into you with the issue, then you're representing the client with his issue. But, you know, and I promise you this because I know we're going to run out of time. I am going to start feeding to you personally some of the information that I circulate up here.
Excellent.
And the reason that I say that is I own American News and Information Services. If you read the California case, I'm a quote-unquote freelance journalist, and I know the rules. And I know that I have to have it in my hand before I pass it to a news desk. Then the news desk has to confirm it through two other sources. But what I'm saying is I acquire information, Larry. This law firm here in Connecticut acquires information, and we can make it generic in nature, feed it to Rich at Connecticut Carry. He puts it up on ConnecticutCarry.com. We do it, you know, when the story was, and it went viral, when the lobbyist for gun owners in Connecticut came up to me and said, Ed, what do you think about an amnesty program for registering prohibited firearms? And I looked at him, I said, absolutely not.
Excellent.
And he said, what do you mean? You know, I said, enforce it or repeal it. No alternative, nothing, no negotiation.
And
enforce it and suffer the consequences, or, and I sent you an email last night where Connecticut News Junkie had the numbers. There's like over 200 people who they weren't even able to come close to meeting the registration deadline. And our legislature goes till May 7th. If they don't repeal it or amend it by May 7th, then the people that were felons on January 1st are going to be felons on December 31st. And how many times does law enforcement let the crack house or the illegal massage parlor operate in town for a year?
Well,
now, do I want gun owners to be arrested, Larry? Absolutely not. But you know something? Eisenhower knew that somebody had to put their boots in the sands of Normandy.
Yep.
And I think now you talk, ask questions. I talk too much.
No. This is information I'm glad we're getting out, and I'm glad that there are attorneys like Rachel Baird. I wish there were more of them who really have a heart for this and have developed an expertise. And from what you're describing, it sounds as if she doesn't just roll over and let judges get away with some of these outrages, because it would be very easy to just take the retainer. And then I've heard people tell me that the attorney said, well, let's just do this the easy way. Why don't you plead, and you'll only get a year actual time.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and year actual time means that you were sentenced to something for more than a year, means your gun rights are gone forever under federal law.
Well, Larry, I'm going to tell you something. When you sit in the audience, so to speak, the participant section of the courtroom, not up beyond the bar, you know, passing the bar, walking up where the lawyers sit. If you're sitting in there and she comes walking into the courtroom and goes up to sit with the other lawyers, you can actually feel the respect she's now got when she walks into the courtroom on a gun case. You know, people are starting to nobody's making off-the-cuff statements to her, you know, because it's not funny, Your Honor.
Mm-hmm.
She goes toe-to-toe with prosecutors. She goes toe-to-toes with judges. And I have to tell you, I know a lot of lawyers in my life. This one has earned my respect and my loyalty. And, some other day we can talk about California, because California is going to, sit there until March 26th, and something's going to happen or not happen. And
I expect we're going to have to do that, but right now we've got one more segment left, and we're getting ready.
And I'll be here when we come back.
Back for this last segment of our show, talking with Ed Peruta. As you've no doubt gathered, if you've been listening all the way through, he's an investigator and does a ton of work with a gun attorney that's done a lot of self-defense cases in court, hands-on, mano-a-mano combat, Rachel Baird, and I'm just so glad to hear about her. Anybody who is in Connecticut ought to pass her name around, because it sounds to me as if she's the go-to attorney if you unhappily would need somebody to represent you on a gun case in Connecticut.
And a lot of those cases are civil cases where firearms have been seized.
Yes.
In preparing to talk to you today, Larry, I make my notes, and I say, okay, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. That's where I came up with 1245.
Right.
If everybody that's listening to this program could memorize 1245 and just go out and read and familiarize themselves with the First, Second, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment. And to be very honest, the Eighth Amendment against unreasonable bond also comes into it, because we've had clients that simply because a gun is involved, their bond is 3 times higher than anybody else that did the exact same thing, and no gun was used. They just are a gun owner. Right.
Or the gun might have been in the trunk of the car, but in any case, the gun was not in their hand.
1245, Larry. 1245. If everybody can learn 1245 and keep it in their head, beware of your First Amendment, protect your Second Amendment, defend against the Fourth Amendment, and keep your mouth shut under the Fifth Amendment.
Absolutely. In fact, I've interviewed one gentleman from Brent Allen Winters who has a book on dealing with the police, and his statement is, if you could be getting in trouble, then the only thing you say is, I want to talk to my lawyer.
My recommendation to Rich Burgess, the president of C.T. Carey, is going to be this. Ask to have some type of a working relationship with gun owners of America. Now, there are other groups in the state of Connecticut. We've got the Connecticut Citizens Defense League. Obviously the National Shooting Sports is right down the road in Newtown. We've got groups. But I'll tell you what this whole thing in Connecticut did, Larry. You have, and I broke it down one time, you have the sportsmen, the guys who go out and shoot animals. You have the target people, the competitive target people, who just like to shoot for competitive or pleasure. You have the investors who purchase firearms as an investment. You have the people that carry firearms, for personal protection. And they were all on different planets when it came to this situation.
Yes.
And in October of 2010, I wanted to hold a firearms summit in Connecticut. I said, let me tell you, winter is coming. The Game of Thrones, winter is coming. We need to all be on the same page and ready for the tsunami. And I was kind of laughed out of the room, so to speak. Threw my presentation on somebody's hamburger plate and said, fine, you'll live to regret this. And I went off, and with Rich Burgess, we started Connecticut Carry. But I think that what I'm trying to say is we are now, there in Connecticut, everybody's in the same lifeboat.
Well, good, because at least that is a positive development. I hear the word radicalization almost. They've been stirred up, and they realize that this is not tiddlywinks. The government actually thinks we are their subjects rather than they our employees.
Right. And I will tell you, there is currently in the works a possibility of getting Rachel and I doing a live public access program with telephone lines coming into 6 small towns in Connecticut, but they are all in the shadow of the Capitol. And I know how to stir things up. I do know how to stir things up. But in Connecticut, you cannot find a radio. You know, I'll walk into a radio station, small radio stations. Let me buy 3 hours a week. I'll buy 3 hours a week. What does it cost? I'll raise the money. Connecticut Carrier will raise the money. How much does it cost? We want a lengthy discussion. I get more out talking to you in this than I can get out in the state of Connecticut, Larry.
That's a pity. That's one of the beauties of the Internet, because a lot of stations are increasingly either having an Internet component to their broadcast, over-the-air broadcast, or I've been doing interviews now with some increasing number that are strictly Internet. The Internet is quite capable of communicating among the people that need to hear the information.
Yes, and I want to thank you for that, because I know. I was on public access and leased access for years. I know how much time it goes in to doing a 1-hour show. Everybody thinks you just walk in the door, sit down, and start talking. It doesn't happen that way.
Well, let's put it this way. When a Limbaugh or a Hannity or somebody's doing 3 hours a day, I know that is more than a full-time job, even for the host, not to mention his staff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would like to thank you, Gun Owners of America. I'd like to thank everybody who supports you, because I know that you're probably looking at a couple of people right now, okay? And I would like to personally thank them, even though I don't know them by name. I would like to, at some point in the future, think that I've contributed something and could be able to contribute again in the future at some point in time.
Well, and ironically, there's one person that both of us really should have an opportunity to thank, and that's Piers Morgan. Because of Piers Morgan, we have what we call the Piers Morgan Memorial Endowment Fund. Because after I appeared on his show and his behavior was so over the top, our server crashed 3 times, and built up our Piers Morgan Memorial Endowment Fund. It's not too many times that one guy can, in effect, give you over $1 million. By the same token, he gave us the Piers Morgan Memorial email list. And it was that email list that we were able, as it turned out, to light a fire under the NRA as we headed into the vote last year on the expansion of the background check.
Yeah.
And they came out and publicly opposed it when, in fact, they had that was a week after we had put out an email requesting that if you belong to the NRA, please call this guy and ask him to get them to do that. Well, a week later they did, and when the NRA did that, Senator Manchin had a news conference saying, "I've been betrayed. They've done a 180 on me. We were working together. What happened?" When you light fires.
I have to tell you, on February 13th, the decision in California came out of the 9th, and the Sheriff Gore put a press release. He put an announcement up on the CCW page of the San Diego Sheriff's Department, saying, "Well, it's not really, we're not going to do any changes yet." And then I got a telephone call, and I'll say his name, Mike Slater from 760 Talk in San Diego, and I said to him, because I was on live air, and I said, "Can I do a shout-out to Sheriff Gore?" And, I'm going to have my finger on the dump button. And I said, "No, I'm in the media. I know the 730 words I can't say." I said, "I won't use them. This is a legitimate shout-out." And he said, "Okay, go ahead." And I said, "Sheriff Gore, I'm not your buddy. And I don't like being put into a group outside of the group of the buddies that you give permits to. So if you live in San Diego County, go call, do whatever you got to do, go down and apply for your permits now." I think it was within 3 hours of that shout-out that it came up that the sheriff had changed his policies.
Beautiful.
Now he's going to accept them by mail and everything, and then Jan Caldwell, the PIO for the San Diego Sheriff's Department, is sitting there saying it was a tsunami of interest. That's
Excellent.
my word.
Well, tsunami, lighting a fire under the posterior. We've actually come to suspect that that's where the optic nerve is, because the only time they can see our point is when it gets hot down there. Listen, Ed Peruta, we're going to have to talk some more on another occasion.
ctcarry.com, Larry.
Excellent.
ctcarry.com, and you'll see information from me, but I'm going to send it to you personally.
I appreciate you and Rachel Baird. Keep it up, guys. You're doing great work.
Stay safe.
To keep and bear arms have never been under as much attack, and gun owners of America are fighting daily in Washington to protect that right. This program, Live Fire, keeps you up to date on that fight. GOA is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. Live Fire is hosted by GOA's Executive Director, Larry Pratt. Be sure to join us next Saturday. And remember, it's not just about gun control. It's a